So Deborah, firstly, thank you so much for this wonderful film. It's so moving and powerful. We're so delighted to have it here at the festival, and it's appropriate that it's our closing film because it's really something special. I'd like to open up to audience questions quite shortly, but maybe I'll just start with a couple of questions of my own. First of all, can you take us back to the beginning of this project? What was it about this source material, the novel, that appealed to you, and what was the process like of putting it together, and how long did that take?
So the origins were receiving the novel and reading the novel by Peter Rock about a family that had been discovered after a long time living undetected in a public park on the outskirts of Portland, which now you guys know the setup there, and was wondering about how they did it, and then he went into detail. He had been informed by a small article, and then from there he had to imagine the rest. And so we were the inheritors of this novel, and the idea was then what does really happen to them and how to depict that and what choices do they have to make about how to proceed, not just with the mainstream society that would love to bring them back in, but also with each other. So it had ingredients that felt so ripe for adaptation, an intense landscape, specific things, practices and techniques, and then a strong relationship. So with all those elements, we thought it would be a strong film.
And tell us a little bit about the process of adapting this novel and about putting together the screenplay. Was that a long process for you?
It was a long process because there were many different variations. Since the rest of the story wasn't known, there were different ways they could take that journey and different things that could befall them. And we had to choose, and we had different versions, and we discussed them very in depth. There were 4 of us that were involved in that discussion, the 2 producing partners, and then me and my creative partner, and we really had to dissect it and figure out what both could keep people's interest, but also then how to marry it to what we really found. And that was a very rich part, the reconnaissance in Oregon, and talking to social workers, talking to detectives that deal with runaways and deal with underage situations and park rangers. How do you detect? How do people remain undetected? Then primitive and outdoor skills, survival teachers. How do people light fires with no lighter or matches? Our ancestors knew how to do that. We sure didn't know how to do that. So those are the things that then start to inflect the script as well and influence it and appear in it and give lots to shoot, give lots of texture.
I just wondered about that shooting process, actually. I mean, obviously you're shooting in a lot of very kind of dense terrain in very sort of difficult, uninhabitable in so many ways spaces. Was it a difficult shoot? Was it like a long and difficult process filming the movie?
Well, we have some important people that were a part of the film that are here. The photographer of the film, the DP of the film, the DOP of the film, Michael McDonough, is here. You have to stand up. I don't know, can you see him? Yeah. Oh, he would just be so far back. And the composer of the film is here, Dickon Hitchcliffe. Do you see him?
Amazing work.
And one of the producers of the film, Ann Harrison, is here. So the questions can be addressed to all of us. But the terrain was, we worked with an Oregon crew. This is a demographic of people that live in a state where it precipitates. It's known for that. The Pacific Northwest is an actual true climatological region. It is a temperate rainforest. That moss, none of that was imported. That moss, all that vegetation, all those layers of things that grow in moist forests that's what Oregon has to offer. And so that inclemency by Oregonians is viewed as is a normal day. They waterproofed us so well. They knew how to put fiberglass on certain surfaces so that the microphone doesn't compete with the raindrops. They had all these techniques to just keep shooting. And Michael and I were actually reminiscing on that because it was a really very energizing and impressive, different, we didn't know them before and we come from different regions. So it was kind of exciting to see how they operate. And we had very good-natured, Tom was extremely good-natured. Everybody was willing to work. We knew that the film needed the rain. We couldn't do much about it anyhow. some of it was very arduous. Most of the stuff for that day, when they get lost in that remote part of the woods, that had to be kind of carried in. We didn't have traditional Sherpa gear, but we had kind of like carts, but it has to be pushed, but other than that, we weren't, no one got frostbite, or, we don't have tales like that. We don't have battle scars. And then to make it feasible, Michael does something kind of, outstanding that any filmmaker that wants to film in the woods, who doesn't have a gargantuan budget and who doesn't want to actually trample and completely mow down the entire beautiful place that they're working, very judicious with the lighting, very strategic in how to make things work with a lot of natural light. So on that level, we tried to actually keep the physicality of the shoot humble.
It's an astonishingly authentic piece of work. The performances in the movie are so naturalistic and everything just feels so lived in. Obviously, you're working with an actor like Ben Foster, who's sort of very established, but a lot of the other cast members are they street cast? I mean, how did you go about casting the rest of the crew?
Well, Tom hails from New Zealand. She's a emerging Kiwi actress, and we found her she made contact with the casting directors and had some good discussions with Skype. So she's absolutely someone who wants to continue to act. So she's definitely someone who's strategic. She's looking for work and looking to be involved in projects. But she really impressed us with her reading of the book and then the script and the things she had to say about it, the extra kind of improvs that she was able to send me. And then the rest is a variety. Dale Dickey, who plays, the role was named for her. Dale is the woman that sort of connects with Tom in the RV park. She's a beloved character actress, and we'd worked with her in the previous film, Winter's Bone, and excited to find a role. I just said, let me just name her Dale right now, and then Portland proffered up a lot of wonderful people. And then some people that are really themselves, of course, that I do love. It's not really off the street because you really have to go seek and they have to really want to do it. But the man at the VA was really the man we saw during the Scout with the diabetic sock table. And, we came close to working with maybe a social worker who could represent himself. That didn't quite work, but he influenced the writing and the understanding of the role very much. Let me try to think of someone else who was really right from there. It'll come to me, I'm sure. But so, yeah, Portland has a rich acting community, and then a few people were brought in that we loved, and then real people contributed. Yeah. We know that from the Taft-Hartley penalties that we endured.
Elaborate?
Oh, just that it's not so easy in a union film just to pluck people off the street. Like it's complicated, but the production really supported that deep yen of mine, or yearning, and I'm ever grateful. Yeah. So.
I did have one question just as regards the sort of, I mean, if it's not too personal a question, the length of time between the movies that you make. I mean, you've made some fantastic films, and obviously Winter's Bone was an amazing breakout hit and introduced the world to Jennifer Lawrence. Could you perhaps talk a little bit about your problems in terms of getting films made? Do you struggle to get movies off the ground? It feels strange that someone with your talent would take so much time to make another movie, or is that just your process?
No, well, oh gosh, how do I get out of this one? No, I would say it's definitely not. It's not exclusively my process. It does take a while. This script, we really had to work at it to get it to a story that we felt really fit the landscape we were looking at, and that we did try quite a few variations of the script, and each issuance of the script does take a minute. I can't even explain why. You're working on it all the time, it feels, especially when you're showering and whatnot, and driving or commuting or whatever. And but some of the projects I come close, and then they have certain kind of stipulations attached to them that don't mesh well with me trying to make films more outside a bigger system. So they might require for their financing to use a very specific set of investable or financeable stars, and that list can be limiting. And it may be also that the kind of ways I like to shoot, it's pretty scrappy. You can't roll on with, I can't accommodate special needs of people that have been living rarefied lifestyles. So I have to really match my stories to people that are willing to participate in them. And, even though it seems good on paper, like, oh, go out to him, him, and him. Well, it turns out that, not so many people can work that way. Or even if they can, possibly their infrastructure that surrounds them on the commerce level can't work that way. They might say, oh, he'd love to do it. And then you see the fee that might be attached, and you're like, well, I don't know. I don't think it's going to work so well. But then some things are better suited to documentaries. So one of the scripts I started on a narrative basis turned out to show the nuance of life after incarceration. It wasn't going to be just a single narrative. I had to hear from several people that were re-entering society after incarceration in different ways. There were a lot of ands. Narratives doesn't do so well with and. Documentary can take on and. That people can be this and this. And it was interesting because it's not to become, to transition from being a criminal to not being a criminal is it's a circuitous path. It might need some exposition that, again, in a narrative might suck, And in a documentary, a person can try to tell you what they've been through and why it's been their journey. And so turns out there's a lot of us right now. We're trying to find a word that isn't exactly like bisexual, but like for bi film, where you do doc and narrative.
Yeah, the intersection of kind of documentary and fiction filmmaking, or people who work in both disciplines.
Yes.
Do you approach them completely differently? Is it like a totally distinct?
Not so much. But they inform each other. But now I'm so deep in this documentary with the guys after incarceration, I wish I stomp my feet. Privately, I have these tantrums where I just say, I wish it was just a narrative. I wish I could, because he tells me what happened 2 weeks ago. And I'm like, I would love to film that. Well, the only way to film that happened 2 weeks ago was to film it in a narrative style, right? So I really, they inform each other tremendously. And there was a panel, this is props to the festival, massive props to the festival. There was a panel, I think right here, or on one of the many beautiful theaters this afternoon, The Art of the Real. Yeah. And this whole discussion was every single filmmaker on that stage was seeing the intersection, right, where real life stories get fictionalized, where fiction needs the real people to play themselves. Hybrid's a word that we're trying to narrow down. It's a broad stroke word, but yeah. So, lo and behold, it's a new. It's not new. It's a new old thing. Social realists here in this country specifically, in Italy, all the countries of Europe really had a very widespread practice of social realism that also frequently involved non-professionals, people in their everyday, real waiters, real street cleaners, real judges, and the list went on.
Do you have questions from the audience? There's a lady just there.
Hey, so you got some really fantastic performances from your actors, and I just wanted to ask how you went about constructing those. Like, do you rehearse a lot? Do you give them books on their character? Like, how do you create a character with your actors?
You named two of them. So definitely materials are very rich. Ben's a reader. He reads a lot about experience of combat veterans, and he's done other roles that have required that of him. So he came with some personally initiated research from prior film projects, but he was very open to reading. And Tom, she said some very, very tender things about the United States. I mean, she knows that we're going through a really, really hideously rough patch, like seriously. And she was so willing to read like all this literature from the VA. The Veterans Administration, and some of the brochures were in themselves very tender. That was like, things you need to know as a teenager of a combat veteran. Things you need to know about one of your parents' PTS, and she really internalized a lot of that. She read the surveys, some of the very emotional questions that are asked of them about what their range of feelings are and what deconstructing what night terrors are, and so she took it upon herself to feel. Both a compassion for that and trying to understand what it is she could do as this, teenage person in his life to sometimes disrupt it, to like help him distract him immediately. She thought of these techniques based on reading the literature, I believe, and and then skills training. They loved it. Certain kinds of actors really love being able to perform all their own tasks on screen, all their own processes. And, I've been schooled to know that it's also very photogenic. And then Michael will probably never get tired of seeing what it's like to, up close. So he does it in 3 levels, right? When Ben sparks that Faro stick, Michael first films it like macro, kind of with all the smoke, and then medium, wide, seeing all the permutations of something very kinetic and interesting. So that was a big part of their training. They took a shine to it, as I said, and they also gave them a special rehearsal process. Ben and Tom rehearsed with each other in their campsite, and then we came in towards the tail end of that when they had already sort of figured out, working with the production team, about where to site the tent, where things would be, what the water catchment would be, how he would catch the water in his poncho, and have, those were things from the training, but then he sort of helped rig that. And so their involvement was immersive, and then they also took cues from each other. She became very good at that, using that knife to carve down the bark and make those feather sticks. So there was room for them to really appreciate. He would glance over and he'd say, like, wow, that's a good job. That feather stick wasn't in the script. That was a skill that they brought through their training and rehearsal into that scene. And then he was truly motivated to compliment her. So it's like a 5-pronged process.
I think we've got time for one more question. The gentleman just here.
You mentioned as part of the adaptation process, it was a case of sitting down and thinking what might happen with these characters, and you had lots of alternatives. I was wondering if you could tell us about any of those alternatives and why they were rejected, and how difficult it was to ultimately decide this was the story you wanted to tell.
I mean, it's a rich question, and it's a rich question for anyone that sits down to do an adaptation. And in the book, the father dies in quite a grisly way. And when we spoke to the author about that, I said, I wanted to know more how that was his imagining of what happened. And he said that it had come, part of that inciting incident that he put in the book, what came from some of his prior imaginings, his other novels, actually. And I felt comfortable with him to say, those are your imaginings. I don't have those because I don't know the antecedent. I don't know what came before. And I said, somehow I keep wondering what would happen if her father lived, that wasn't how they parted, that they had to part for other reasons and with a different set of understandings, not through just not through a specific kind of physical tragedy that terminated it so point blank. And he's like, carry on, what think about that. And I felt that he really encouraged us to consider other ways that the film, that they might proceed. And at one point, we tried a version where he did die, but that film, the ending took place between the 2 girls that Tom went back to find in Portland, one of those girls she had met at the facility, at the social services place, and that she wanted to bring that girl back to Forest Park and kind of show her that they could live a different life. The other girl, the urban girl, was very skeptical, but it was so it ended very open. You didn't know what would happen. All you knew was that Tom was doing her damnedest to kind of recreate the camp in a different location in this 8-kilometer park, where she really believed she could now figure out another spot where she'd be undetected. And somehow that didn't satisfy either. So we decided to run the scenario where the father stays, where their parting has to be negotiated, has to be understood. And it jacked up, of course, the emotionality and the journey they had to take. They had to take bullets at the end, but those are the bullets of emotion. Those are the bullets of what it means to let someone who's helped form you, or that you've loved and relied upon, or just to know that life can continue and that they might have to go, and you might have to leave. And so that's how we ended there with that version of the script. But it took us a long time to get there.
That's a very beautiful ending. Thank you so much for joining us, Debra.
Thank you.
This is one of the last 2 screenings of the festival. So I've just got a couple of thank yous. You're privileged to be here for the very, very last screening of the festival this year. Without a few of our sponsors, we wouldn't be able to make this happen, and I hope all of you have seen a lot of films over the weekend. So I'd just like to thank Sundance TV Global, Mubi, Time Out, The Evening Standard, Hop House, Film London, the Mayfair Hotel, and Adobe, who all have done immeasurable things to make sure this festival happens, and long may it continue. Thank you all so much, and please do vote for the film in the audience award.
And Sony, they're releasing it here.
And Sony, of course.
End of June.